Welcome to another video of GeoSpinach. Today with me, I have again Lucas Pinkers, a young entrepreneur who has created quite a lot of ventures in his life, all of them successful, and many more to come. A brilliant mind to talk with, well-versed, and a very fast mind, in my opinion. We have been friends for years now, and I have to say he's one of the best debaters I have ever met. And today's discussion is a more casual one, the opinion of a Southern European, as myself, a Cypriot, on the EU, and the opinion of a Northern European, as is Lucas from the Netherlands, from Maastricht, about the EU. And the general topic is, what is our outlook on the EU? So Lucas, starting with you.
Hey, so I guess I can sort of say some things that I think are very beneficial of the EU, first of all. And think this is very widely shared. It's not very controversial, but it's just like, it's very good for free trade, right? It was like, we are all small countries by, the size of world economies. Like there's most countries are less than 10 million people, even in the EU. And being able to do free trade with this entire zone has been, hugely beneficial economically speaking, right? The fact that if you live close to the border and you have to, also because we're so small, essentially, the amount of people that live close to a border, like in Netherlands, is probably like something like half the population lives within, I don't know the exact statistics, right? But it's like in the US, maybe a couple percent of the entire population lives within 50 kilometers of a border. Well, in the Netherlands or Belgium or something, like probably half population lives in 50 kilometers of a border. And so making these borders more open so you can go to school, you can meet other people, trading and stuff has been, also hearing from my parents, so it used to be they had to, there was an actual border like next door, has been hugely beneficial. And we do have, and it also allows us, because we're such a big trading bloc, to negotiate better deals with China, with the US, because if you're just like one country and you're so small, the negotiating power is really weak and you just always get a really bad deal. So economically speaking, it's been very good. And it can also help with standardization of certain things, right? And it also helps with, for example, like it is beneficial that we help the less developed countries in Eastern Europe to get more developed. Like it's very good investment if you sort of spend their 100 euros to help them build a bridge or whatever, then in the long run, we get a lot more back because they become a bigger market. We can export more, we can have more labor from them, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been very beneficial. And overall, I generally do think that the EU, like as a, the concept of this, like, because we are too small in this big world, the big blocks like China, US, like we need to be unified. We can't stand our own in this world. However, I do think that there are definitely some issues because the EU is not designed to be this like powerful. Like it was initially started as sort of just a trade union, free trade, and now it's getting involved in more and more things over local governments, which is not necessarily bad, but there are large issues with the way like current governance works. And I'm sure you'll have some views as well, how like EU is currently like forcing immigration upon countries that don't consent to it. And for example, one example that I have is like, we're at war with, Ukraine's at war with Russia, and we don't like Russia, and we like Russia bad, so we have price caps on their oil. You can only buy Russian oil under $60. But oil is currently under $60 or whatever. It's basically at that price, so it's still flowing. And so it makes sense to just lower the price cap or make it just illegal to ship oil from Russia. But basically, for example, Greeks has a lot of like big shipping families that own the majority of these oil tankers, and they quasi have some levers in their local government, the Greek government. And so even though essentially the entire EU minus Greece thinks it's a good idea to, for example, lower the price caps, this one country can just be like, even if it's for corrupt reasons, can just be, fuck you, I'm not doing this, and it can veto this. Every country can veto anything, right? And so, and that might have some good reasons, but we're currently seeing a lot of situations also where a single country is just refusing to vote for something that's objectively better for everyone just because they can get benefits out of it, or just because whatever reason, right? And so that's not how democracies work, right? The majority, generally speaking, rules. But if a country like Cyprus, which has like less than 1% of the entire population of the EU can just block anything, we have to rethink how the EU is sort of governed, I would say. But other than that, I think like the long term, like, it has a lot of good things it does.
I will say we have 0.19% of the EU population.
And like 5% of voting power.
Well, no, we have 6 out of the 500 or so politicians,
yes, so
and veto power. Now, in regards to the EU, personally, I am a European federalist, so I agree with Lucas. I am quite vocal in the importance of Europe in general as a concept. And most importantly, yes, in economic terms, it's brilliant. I'm not going to repeat the same stuff. Totally agree with Lucas on this. But on the concept of political capital, the fact that a stronger state as Europe can have an independent policy. My issue is, and I think this is the issue that many people have within the EU, and Lucas can agree on this, that there is the idealistic Europe and the realistic Europe. My current issue with Europe is that they are pushed, because of the way that it's structured, the majority, if the Northern European countries, which have similar economies in many instances, agree on something, then everyone is kind of forced to follow, except on bigger subjects where you can theoretically veto. In many smaller subjects, you are kind of enforcing your ideas and your belief on the other nations. So that applies to Hungary, to Poland, to Romania, to Bulgaria, to countries that are not as small as Cyprus. Secondly, it's quite ironic for us Cypriots, what we see currently in the Russian-Ukrainian war, where the whole of the EU is getting up to the rescue of Ukraine. It's like, we have to protect the freedom of Ukraine. And okay, yes, of course we have. Like, we both support the Ukrainian effort, but as Lucas has seen by himself when he came to Cyprus, where is the EU when Turkey enters the EU territorial waters with their warships literally bombarding our economic zone? Or every day when they are flying their aeroplanes above the Cypriot airspace with no license whatsoever. Turkey doesn't recognize Cyprus as an independent nation, and directly attacking in any international law basis the EU itself. But because Cyprus is so small, they don't fucking care. So for us, the way the EU currently works in many essence is hypocritical. So they are very vocal in some subjects like green stuff and so forth, subjects that the populace of Northern Europe find important in their sense. So I'm not saying they are not important, but they are more important for them, but not subjects that are more important for the other part of the population, which is Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. But on the other side, of course, I will agree with Lucas here and say that, yes, Southern Europe gains way more economically from the EU than Northern Europe does. Like, way more. There is no comparison. If you've seen each individual Southern European country and the way it has managed its economy by itself, I much prefer a dictator managing my economy rather than my country. Ironically enough, we're really bad at managing economies. My issue is, and again, as an Austrian economist, will be a confederate state of Europe. Or currently we're in the EU level, so we are like an alliance. For the general audience, if they don't understand, you have an alliance, like two countries liking each other, and then you have a minor economic union, like the EU, and then on parallel, you have a military union or a military alliance. And then the next stage, the just above stage, is the confederate state, where all of these countries stop being countries and become one nation, and each country still can do whatever it wants, each state can do whatever it wants within itself. But when it comes to foreign policy, you have the same idea. So there is no veto there. But when it comes to individual states and how they run their economies, there is veto. And then, of course, you have the federal state like the US, and then a full democracy with no state power like in Cyprus. So, Lucas.
Well, I just also thought of something where I think, even though I think that like more EU is good, I think that what's currently, and we can't reverse it because we have it and it's irreversible. I think the euro was a bad idea. I think it ultimately, the euro is a good idea, but implementing euro at a stage where we're not that unified at all, where every country, really cares about its own interests much more than everyone else, has its own taxation systems, its own social systems, like anything. You can't. I think there's reasons why it's bad to have a common currency, which probably too long to get into fully now on this episode. But
actually, a good discussion for the next time. I actually disagree with that quite a lot. From an economic perspective, I will say that Southern and Eastern Europe has gained from the euro just for one reason, and that reason is stability.
Oh yeah, but I'm arguing from a Northern European standpoint of view, right?
From the Northern Europe, wait. For the Northern European standpoint, the majority of the minor nations like the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Denmark, Sweden, and so forth, they didn't actually have their own currency. They already have a pegged currency on either the Deutsche Mark or the British pound or the franc, maybe, or even the dollar. So it's not like they had.
Do they like?
Some did, some didn't. It really depends. I think the Netherlands had a fluctuation in currency, but
yeah, Denmark also. Some of them.
The main thing, though, and the main proponent of the euro currency was Germany. And the main reason Germany wanted to have a common currency, it was because the Deutsche Mark was so massively overvalued that it was unable to compete.
No, I know. I've heard this argument a lot, but I think that was simply because the German central bank was, for cultural reasons, etc., very, very unwilling to print money. It's really easy to make your currency. Look at the Swiss franc. Everyone, Swiss is a very small country, and everyone wants to own a Swiss franc because it's whatever neutral, blah blah blah. So what is the Swiss? But the Swiss don't want their currency, their franc, to go up too much in value. So all they have to do, which they're doing,
practically pegged on the euro.
No, it's not. It's not.
No, it's not actually pegged on the euro. So it's not a pegged currency. But
no, it's not pegged. No. Do you know why? Because basically, if they would let it float, it would go way above the euro. But they were like, we don't want it to go up. But making currency stop going down is really hard, because the only way you can do is either increase interest rates or literally use your reserves like dollars to buy your own currency. But your currency being too strong, you can just infinitely sell your own currency and just buy, like the Swiss National Bank literally buys Apple stock and stuff.
Yes, but for Germany specifically, and this doesn't apply to Netherlands, applies only to Germany, France, and Britain. Britain didn't follow, but France and Germany. The common currency guaranteed exports to all Southern and Eastern European countries for them. So it forced all of those nations to have the same currency, and thus making it easier for Germany and for France in a lesser extent to be able to sell to Greece, to Italy, to Spain, to Cyprus, to Poland, and so forth.
Yeah, that's the
Germany. The thing is, for the Netherlands, I will totally agree it was a bad deal. And going back to the original argument of the EU, the smaller states in the EU tend to get the shorter stick of the deal, because within the bloc, they have so little political power. So yes, disproportionately more, but actually very small political capital, to the extent that the current German bloc of the EU constitutes of Denmark, Sweden, partially Poland, partially sometimes, fully the Netherlands, fully Belgium, or partially, Luxembourg, Austria, and the Czech Republic, and Slovenia at some extent. So Germany even if it has disproportionately less voting power, because of the economic dependence of all of those minor nations on Germany, Germany has actually kind of full autonomy over the EU. With all of these nations and minor support from France, Germany can pass whatever it wants. And I will argue this is the bigger issue that Europe currently has. And I will say something now, something really, really controversial, and many people will get offended, really, really offended. Clemenceau in 1919, the Treaty of Versailles, he might not have been so wrong in the argumentation of breaking Germany into smaller states. Like, hear me out. The concept is from Metternich, from 1814. The concept of Europe, the idea that you should have, whenever you have, if you want peace or if you want prosperity, you have to have all of the parties involved have a similar level of power, so a balance of power. So whenever this group comes together, this group will go against them. So it is always a balance of power. And Europe, originally imagined by Churchill, which didn't join immediately, wanted to build a Europe based on this, on the common law system. Because the UK withdrew from the deal due to the Labour's government back then, under Franz de Gaulle and the creation of the EU, Europe became very centralized. And I think that's the issue that the majority of smaller countries in the EU, despite being from the north or the south, have an issue with the EU currently. What's your opinion on this, Lucas?
Yeah, I can also see that being a problem. It's very hard to resolve, right? On the one hand, you see that small countries are able to sometimes, when it really matters to them, right, veto, even though they're like a very small part of the population. On the other hand, indeed, on the majority of stuff where they don't want to use their veto power, right, essentially Germany control and plus France control the EU. So on the one hand, the big ones have too much power. So it's like, yeah, there might be ways to kind of come more of a middle way, but it's definitely like, I think there are actually, by the way, like there are systems where that's possible. But I do agree. I can see from the perspective of a lot of countries that like Germany like imposes a lot of like, you know, if it's not significant enough for, let's say, Cyprus to want to veto it because they don't want to always do that. They want to kind of stay on the good side, right? They veto this only for special situations, then they'll just have to accept it because Germany and the Netherlands and stuff do it, and then you'll just slightly. And we also don't know what's going on, right? Like all of this stuff kind of goes behind closed doors between like 17 layers of elected politicians, where like there's so many layers in between. Like we don't really know what's even happening, what the deals are made, like what go behind the scenes to eventually get these laws passed.
One last question before we close this. Of course, guys, this is going to be a topic we're going to be discussing quite a lot in this subject. I am a strong proponent of the EU federal idea, but at the same time, I have quite a lot of disagreements with the way that EU is currently running. So do expect way more videos on the EU specifically. Now, Lucas, to create a common EU, so to create a nation, first of all, accept a common currency and free exchange of peoples and populations, you require two more things, maybe a bit more, but two very important things. One is lingua franca, so common language, and the other one is a common army. You as Lucas and you as a Dutchman. What is your opinion on this?
I mean, I think common language is definitely very important, and something that as a Dutch person I didn't realize how that we're not even that far, because Dutch people like have a very high level of English proficiency. So when we go to, and Scandinavian countries as well, so we think that it's pretty normal that, you know, and the Belgians as well, that, you know, people can speak English, especially young people, right? You go to France and it's still okay. When you go to Italy or Spain and you're like, what? These countries are like, people don't speak English. Like, you're surprised, and you can't. It's like I feel more at home in the United States, which is not the EU, because I can speak the language, or in Canada or Australia, than I feel in Spain, because I can't even speak the language. So, like, of course, if you want to have any sense of unity, like, it's absurd that you have like the European Parliament, you have all these translators. Like, how it's just the first thing you need to feel related to someone is to be able to communicate. So the language, and I think, quite shocked how far we still have to go. I would say on army's perspective, I mean, and also on top of that, I would say it's, seeing how the Dutch education system and the Danes and the Norwegians all have very good levels of English. It's definitely possible, right? Like, you can have good levels of English. And I mean, on the army sense, I don't really know. I mean, the Dutch people, I think generally we don't have any nationalism in the sense, like, no one goes to the army basically. In my surroundings, like, we feel like we're safe because, we're, far away from Russia and Turkey and all the troubles, right? It seems like, I think if you ask most people now, they would say we don't even need an army. I don't agree with that, but like, I can't
yes,
really.
But how would you feel though if you were to serve in a country like Poland or Cyprus? So what if you feel like if you had children and there is a potential for war, so there is a conscription, and they get conscripted not to fight to defend the Netherlands, but to defend a far-off piece of land, of an island that they never seen in their lives?
No, I would not like that. It would be a good thing if I agree in the fact that, like, it would be good if we all would do that, hypothetically speaking, in an optimal world. But I think that I think like 99% of Europeans definitely is not willing to, maybe Germany, but like, I'm not going to Spain and defend them, like, and have my kid die there.
The thing is, though, with the common army, and the reason I love it is, and the code I always have on my YouTube channel is, you have the big army, you have the fancy weapons, not to fight the war with. You have them so no one can fight you. Switzerland is the best example of this. That's the reason they never went into World War I and World War II. Proportionally to the population, they had a massive army and quite well-equipped army. The fact that that army existed was good enough for Switzerland to have an independent policy. And for me, a common army in Europe, and this is a message to my European audience, a common army in Europe is not actually about defending Europe. No one is actually going to attack Europe, like, except that the fact that we are the global trade center of the world. The economy of the EU and the size of the EU is astronomically high compared to our neighbors, that it's impossible for anyone to actually do any harm to the EU. And even if they dare to do so, the amount of the army that we can create in a minimal amount of time is so extraordinarily high as a unified force that, in my opinion, the benefits of a common army completely outweigh any disadvantages. Of course, this comes a bit biased from a person that has served in the military, is in it's in a country that's occupied by Turkey. But the thing I always used to say when I was in the Netherlands was like, what if it was the Netherlands that was occupied? What if it was Poland? What if it was Lithuania that was occupied?
I don't know if I fully agree with it. I do agree, but definitely I think one point that I want to actually add to what you said, right? It's like, by just having that force, we currently don't have that, right? And so we have NATO, but NATO is mostly supplied by the US, and US can bully us around because they have this big lever. Like, they can always say, well, if you don't do this, we'll pull out. And so it just even if it's not related to the army at all, they can use this on any issue. And so we lose, and especially now with Ukraine, we're losing a lot of sovereigns. We're basically doing whatever the US tells us to do because they're the main people actually fighting arming the Ukrainian force. It's not the EU, even though it's on our soil, right? So they don't do that for free. They don't like the benevolent US states that they're just going to help of course not. They want something in return, right? And so it will will get a lot by just having that army, not having to, have the US basically be the ones that defend us. Get us a lot of like sovereignty.
The irony with the whole Ukrainian war is that the Europe has supplied way more to Ukraine than the US has in total, especially in the early stages of the war, because Eastern European countries had their old Soviet equipment.
Well, but also it's monetarily, right?
Yeah. Okay. But ironically enough, the EU, I'm not against the US, so, and I think Lucas agrees on this, the Europe is part of the West, allied with the US. But what we don't like as Europeans, both of us, is to be on an equal standing with the US. And when it comes to foreign policy, what we see is the US commanding the EU to do stuff, or the EU independent states. So when it comes to foreign policy, we forget about the EU. Now, to finish this, in regards to lingua franca, that the majority of Southern Europeans would have probably been like really pissed off than this, like never giving up my language until my dead body. Personally, I actually agree that we need a lingua franca. And the irony is that even if you don't like it as a concept, because of the free trade, because of the work you are doing, not you, Lucas, I mean, each individual you are doing, the reason you are currently employed is the EU and the free market that we currently have. Inevitably, it's run on English, either you like it or not. That's the irony of language dominance. It's the English is the language. We're getting more and more influenced by English. Now, Latin-speaking countries are much easier to adapt to English than non-Latin-speaking countries. But I think inevitably, if we compare Southern European boomer generation English knowledge with the 90s kids English knowledge, the increase is exponentially unprecedented. So yes, if you go to Italy, you will see that not many people speak really good English. But if you've seen those same Italians 30 years ago, it doesn't compare. Yeah. So I think lingua franca, you don't even actually need a common policy. Inevitably, we'll come to a point like, guys, everyone just speaks English.
No, I think, it's happening, right? What I was more trying to say is like, I thought I was already there, but apparently not there yet. But it is happening indeed. Like every generation speaks more. Like the only thing that would be bad is that Germany or France, like, well, I want to have a lingua franca, but it should not be English because it's not in the EU or something. It should be French.
Oh, God. French being French. Like, there is nothing more here. Sorry, French people, but French being French. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. And if you actually have questions for us or topics you want us to discuss, me and Lucas, we always had quite a lot of good discussions, and we are open to have those discussions. And thank you for watching. Lucas, thank you for participating, and have a good night.